My sister kicked my pregnant belly at Mom's birthday party. This is what you get for thinking you're better than family. She screamed. I couldn't breathe, my baby went silent. Then my federal judge husband stepped forward. You just committed a felony in. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. That morning was a Saturday in late May. The Denver sun was already spilling through our bedroom window, painting golden stripes across the floor. I remember it so clearly. I was 6 months pregnant, and I felt good. Truly good. Strong. I was carrying our baby girl, and she was an active little thing, always pressing her tiny feet against my ribs like she was eager to join the world. I could hear my husband, Preston, already in the kitchen. The rich smell of brewing coffee, his was always extra strong, drifted up the stairs, mixed with the faint sound of him humming something classical. It was our routine. Our peaceful, happy routine. I stretched, a slow, careful movement these days, and placed a hand on my growing belly. Good morning, little one, I whispered. She gave a little flutter in response, as if to say good morning back. Preston and we had a good life. A life we had built together, one that felt safe and steady. He was a federal judge, the youngest ever appointed to the Byron White Courthouse downtown. I'd met him 8 years ago when I was working as a court reporter during his confirmation hearing. I remember being so struck by him, not just by his intelligence, but by the kindness in his dark eyes, the way they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I never imagined then that I'd marry him, or that his steady presence would become the anchor of my entire world. I finally managed to get out of bed and pulled on a flowing emerald green dress, one that complemented my belly, and slipped into a pair of comfortable flats. Today was my mom's big 60th birthday party. And despite the complicated feelings I had about big family gatherings, I wanted to look nice for her. Just then, Preston appeared in the doorway. He was holding 2 mugs, steam curling from them like little prayers. You look radiant, he said, that familiar smile reaching his eyes. He set my mug of decaf tea on the nightstand. Thank you, I said, my voice a little tight. I took the mug gratefully. I'm nervous about today. He didn't have to ask why. He sat on the edge of our bed, his expression growing serious. Brenda's been texting you again, hasn't she? I just nodded, pulling up the messages on my phone. The latest one had arrived at 6 a.m. It was the same old story. Another rant about how I thought I was better than everyone now that I'd married a judge. How I'd abandoned my roots. Preston read them over my shoulder, and I felt his jaw tighten. Audrey, this isn't normal sibling rivalry, he said, his voice low and firm. Some of these messages are genuinely concerning. He was right, of course. My little sister, Brenda, had always been volatile. Growing up, she was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, while I was the quiet, steady one. But lately, her anger seemed more focused, more venomous. It had intensified ever since Preston and I announced the pregnancy. She accused me of thinking I was too good for the family now that we lived in Cherry Creek instead of our old neighborhood in Lakewood. The irony was, Brenda lived in a custom-built house her husband Gary's family had helped them get, drove a brand-new SUV, and took lavish vacations twice a year. But somehow, in her eyes, I was the one who had gotten too big for her britches. She's just jealous, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they felt weak, like a flimsy excuse I'd been using for years. You know how she gets around family events. Preston stood up and adjusted his tie. It was a subtle gesture, but I knew what it meant. He was shifting into his professional mindset, the calm, analytical judge taking over. Promise me something, he said. If she starts anything today, anything at all, we leave. Immediately. But it's Mom's birthday, Preston. I can't just bail on her. Your mother will understand, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. Our baby's safety comes first. I mean it, Audrey. We leave at the first sign of trouble. I agreed, though a part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, prayed it wouldn't come to that. Despite everything, Brenda was still my sister. We'd shared a room growing up, built forts in the backyard. There had to be some piece of that bond left, right? Some remnant of the sister who used to braid my hair before school pictures. I had to believe there was. The drive to my parents' house in Lakewood took about 30 minutes. With each mile, it felt like we were traveling back in time, through familiar neighborhoods where the houses got a little smaller, the lawns a little less manicured. It was the world I grew up in, a world Brenda claimed I had abandoned. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, the party was already in full swing. Cars lined both sides of the street, and the sound of laughter and mariachi music drifted from the backyard. My mom, Lorraine, had gone all out. She'd rented white tents and transformed their modest yard into something magical. Ready? Preston asked, squeezing my hand as we got out of the car. As I'll ever be, I sighed, trying to force a smile. We walked through the side gate into a scene of wonderful, controlled chaos. There had to be at least 50 people milling around. Tables were laden with tamales, pozole, and a massive tres leches cake. The smell of grilled meat mixed with the roses from my mom's garden, a scent that immediately transported me back to childhood summers. My mom spotted us first. Lorraine Rodriguez, even at 60, was a force of nature. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant updo, and she wore a dress the color of deep wine. She rushed over, her face glowing with that particular joy that comes from being surrounded by everyone you love. Mija! You look beautiful, she exclaimed, wrapping me in a careful hug that accommodated my belly. And Preston, so handsome, as always. Preston accepted her embrace with genuine warmth. That was one of the things I loved most about him. Despite his formal profession and prestigious salary, he'd never shown even a hint of condescension toward my working-class family. If anything, he always seemed more relaxed here than he did at stuffy judicial conferences. Happy birthday, Lorraine, he said, producing a small, wrapped gift from his jacket pocket. 60 looks wonderful on you. She beamed and guided us toward the main family table where my dad, Walter, was holding court with his old construction crew buddies. My dad had aged more visibly than my mom. His hands were permanently stained with calluses and concrete dust, a testament to a life of hard work. He stood when he saw us, his weathered face breaking into a huge, genuine smile. There's my successful daughter, he boomed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of Old Spice and sawdust. And how's my granddaughter doing in there? Kicking like she wants to be a soccer player, I laughed, placing his hand on my belly just as the baby obliged with a strong little thump. Dad's eyes widened with wonder. It was a pure, beautiful moment. And that's when I saw her. Brenda was standing across the yard, near the makeshift bar. She already had a drink in her hand, her expression unreadable from this distance. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like a coiled spring. Her husband, Gary, stood beside her, his hand touching her arm in a gesture I recognized all too well, the calming motion, the attempt to de-escalate before anything even started. He looked tired. He always looked tired. Gary caught my eye and gave a small, strained wave. I waved back, my stomach twisting into a knot. For the first hour, everything was surprisingly peaceful. My mom, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, proudly led us around, introducing Preston to relatives who regarded him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. We found ourselves at a table with my cousin Elena, discussing her kids' plans for their college fund and just enjoying the food and the music. For a moment, I actually started to relax. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. That was my mistake. Hope is a dangerous thing when it comes to people like my sister. The illusion of peace shattered the moment Brenda approached our table. She moved with a kind of predatory grace, her eyes fixed on us. Well, she said, her voice dripping with a familiar, sharp-edged sarcasm I remembered from 1,000 childhood arguments. If it isn't the royal couple, gracing us with your presence. I saw Preston's hand move slightly closer to mine on the table. He looked up at her, his expression perfectly calm. Hello, Brenda. How are you? Oh, I'm just great, she said, taking a long swallow of her margarita. Business is booming. You know, some of us still do honest work for a living. The jab was clearly aimed at me, though her eyes remained locked on my husband. My cousin Elena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I should, go check on the kids, she mumbled, making a hasty retreat and leaving the three of us in a triangle of simmering hostility. Brenda, I said, keeping my voice low. It's Mom's party. Can we please not do this today? Do what? She asked, her voice full of mock innocence. I'm just catching up with my brother-in-law. Asking about his very important job where he gets to decide other people's fates from his fancy throne. Preston remained perfectly still, a master of projecting calm authority. It was a skill honed by years of presiding over contentious hearings. I understand you and Gary are doing well with the business, he said, his tone polite and even. Your parents must be very proud. It was exactly the right thing to say, acknowledging her without taking the bait. But Brenda wasn't interested in de-escalation. She was here for a fight. Yeah, well, some of us stayed loyal to the family instead of running off to marry money and live in fancy neighborhoods, she spat. Brenda, stop, my voice came out sharper than I intended, drawing glances from nearby tables. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Her eyes finally shifted to me, and I saw something dark and ugly in them. It was the same look she used to get right before a childhood tantrum, a volatile mixture of hurt and rage. You haven't called Mom in 3 weeks. You missed Dad's doctor's appointment. But you show up here in your designer dress, acting like you still belong. I've been dealing with pregnancy complications, I said, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. The doctor put me on modified bed rest after that bleeding scare. Always an excuse with you, isn't it? Preston's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That's enough. Brenda turned her full attention back to him, a sneer twisting her lips. Oh, the judge speaks. What are you going to do? Hold me in contempt? I'm going to ask you to step away from my wife. Your wife? Brenda let out a harsh, ugly laugh. She was my sister long before she was your wife. My sister who used to help Dad with estimates, who knew every worker by name. Now look at her, sitting there like some delicate little flower who can't handle a conversation. The mariachi band had finished their set, and in the sudden quiet, our voices carried. I could see my mom approaching from across the yard, her face creased with concern. Brenda, please, I said, standing up slowly. Let's just go somewhere private and talk about this. Oh, now you want to talk? After months of treating us like we're beneath you? I never treated you like that. The hell you didn't. The profanity was loud enough that several conversations stopped completely. You know what your problem is, Audrey? You think marrying a judge makes you better than us. You think his precious title elevates you above your raising? Preston stood up as well, his movement deliberate and controlled. Brenda, you're upset. But you are crossing a line. What line? She stepped closer, and I could smell the tequila on her breath. The line where I'm not allowed to call out my own sister for being a fake? My own anger finally surfaced. You want to know what's fake? This whole victim act. You're just jealous because Preston and I are happy. You can't stand that I found someone who treats me with respect. Respect? Her face flushed red. Is that what you call it when your husband sits there judging us with his fancy education? He looks at Dad's hands, at the way we talk, like this whole party is some quaint little ethnic experience for him. You're projecting your own insecurities, Brenda, Preston said, his voice steady but with an edge of steel. I have nothing but respect for your family. Insecurities? She laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from a man who thinks a black robe makes him God. That's enough. I stepped between them, my heart racing. You're drunk and you're embarrassing Mom on her birthday. Don't you dare lecture me about embarrassing the family, she shrieked. You're the one who ran off and married the first man with a big salary who paid any attention to you. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 8 years, to have her reduce our love to a transaction. I felt tears threatening, and I hated myself for showing her that weakness. Take that back, I whispered. Why? Because it's true? She leaned in, her voice a venomous hiss. You know what I think? I think you got pregnant on purpose. To trap the judge with a baby so he can't leave when he gets tired of playing house with his little charity project. The air was sucked out of the party. Everyone was staring. My mom had gone pale. My dad was pushing his way through the crowd, his face dark with fury. Brenda Rodriguez, you apologize to your sister right now, my mom commanded, but her voice shook. Brenda ignored her, her eyes locked on me. That's it, isn't it? You figured out how to lock him down permanently. Get yourself knocked up so he has to keep pretending you belong in his world. And something inside me just snapped. All the years of making excuses for her, of biting my tongue, it all came rushing out in a wave of pure rage. You're pathetic, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent yard. Absolutely pathetic. You can't stand that I'm happy because you're miserable. Her face went from red to white. You little. Brenda. My dad's roar cut through the air as he finally reached us, but it was too late. It was already too late. In the split second that followed my words, time seemed to warp. I saw Brenda lunge forward. For a heartbeat, I thought she was just going to shove me, to grab my arm. I was wrong. Instead, her leg came up, fast and hard. Her foot, clad in a pointed toe heel, connected squarely with my rounded belly. The world exploded in a starburst of white-hot pain. The breath was knocked completely out of me. I doubled over, a strangled gasp tearing from my throat, but no air would come in. The pain was immense, a deep, sickening agony that radiated through my entire abdomen. But worse than the pain, so much worse, was the silence. The terrifying, absolute stillness inside my womb. My baby girl, who had been so active all morning, went completely still. I vaguely heard Preston shout my sister's name, a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. I heard my mother scream, a sharp, piercing cry of horror. I heard the sickening thud of bodies colliding as my dad, with a lifetime of pent-up frustration, tackled his own daughter to the ground. But all of it seemed far away, muffled, as if happening underwater. The only thing that was real was the terrifying silence where my daughter's kicks should have been. I sank to my knees on the grass, my hands pressed protectively over my stomach, my mind chanting a desperate prayer. Please, baby girl. Please kick me. Please just let me know you're okay. Please, please, please. Preston was beside me in an instant, his hands gentle on my shoulders, his face a mask of white-knuckled terror. Audrey, talk to me. Where does it hurt? The baby, I gasped, finally managing to suck in a ragged breath. She's not moving, Preston. She's not moving. I saw the color drain from his face, but his voice, when he spoke, was a fortress of calm. It was the voice of the judge, the man who brought order to chaos. We're going to the hospital. Right now. Around us, the party had devolved into pandemonium. My dad was pinning a struggling, screaming Brenda to the lawn. My mom was sobbing, repeating I'm so sorry, over and over again. Gary, Brenda's husband, just stood frozen near the bar, his hand covering his mouth in horror, a statue of uselessness. Preston helped me to my feet, his arms supporting most of my weight. Tom, he called out to our neighbor, who had been watching the whole scene unfold, his eyes wide as dinner plates. Can you pull your car around? We need to get to Presbyterian Hospital immediately. As Tom ran for his keys, I looked back at my sister. My dad had hauled her upright, but her face showed no remorse. No shock. No regret. If anything, she looked satisfied. A chilling, triumphant smirk played on her lips, like she'd finally gotten the reaction she'd been craving. This is what you get, she spat, struggling against Dad's grip. This is what happens when you think you're better than your family. And that's when it happened. Preston stopped walking. He turned slowly, deliberately, to face my sister. In that moment, the gentle, kind man I loved vanished completely. In his place stood Federal Judge Preston Hayes, and he carried with him the full, crushing weight of the United States government. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. It was perfectly calm. And it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. Brenda Rodriguez, he said, and the absolute authority in his tone silenced the entire yard. Even the children stopped playing. You just committed felony assault in front of more than 50 witnesses. He took a step closer. You assaulted a pregnant woman. My pregnant wife. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Brenda's features. The smug satisfaction began to falter. Preston continued, each word a perfectly chosen, perfectly sharpened weapon. When we get back from the hospital, when I know for certain that my wife and my daughter are safe, I am going to destroy you. He let that hang in the air for a moment. I'm not going to do it as Audrey's husband. I am going to do it as a federal judge who just watched you commit a violent, premeditated crime. The FBI will investigate. The U.S. Attorney will prosecute. And I will use every single legal resource at my disposal to ensure you face the maximum penalty under federal law. Tom's car pulled up to the edge of the yard. Preston turned his back on my sister and guided me toward it without another word. As we walked away, I heard Brenda start to shout something, but my dad's voice cut her off with a finality that was heartbreaking. You're done, Dad told his daughter, his voice cracking with grief and rage. You're done with this family. The car ride to the hospital was a blur of silent terror. Preston held my hand, his grip a lifeline in a swirling ocean of fear. I just kept my other hand pressed to my belly, waiting, begging for a sign, a flutter, anything. But there was only silence. That awful, ominous silence. She's going to be okay, Preston murmured, though I could hear the raw fear under his forced reassurance. What if she's not? I whispered, the words catching in my throat. What if Brenda, what if? Don't, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Don't think like that. We're going to get you checked out, and then we're going to handle this. I looked at his profile as he stared out the window, his jaw set like granite. My sister had no idea what she had done. She thought she'd kicked me. What she'd really done was declare war on one of the most powerful institutions in the country. And they were going to crush her. The emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital was a whirlwind of controlled urgency. They rushed me into an examination room, and soon Dr. Chang, my OBGYN, was there. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, and her calm competence had always reassured me. But today, I needed more than reassurance. I needed a miracle. As she attached the fetal monitor to my belly, the cool gel made me shiver. Preston and I both stared at the monitor screen, our breath held, waiting for a sign of life. The room was silent, save for the hum of the machine. It felt like an eternity. And then, there it was. A rapid, whooshing sound filled the room. Strong. Steady. Defiant. The sound of our daughter's heartbeat. Your baby girl is fine, Audrey, Dr. Chang said softly. Heart rate is perfect. She was probably just stunned by the trauma. Relief, so absolute and overwhelming, flooded through me, and I just started to sob. Great, heaving, grateful sobs. Preston leaned over and kissed my forehead, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "She's okay," he whispered. "Our daughter is okay." Dr. Chang continued her examination. "The impact site is already bruising," she said, gently probing my abdomen. "You're going to be sore for several days, but I don't see any signs of internal injury. However, I want to keep you overnight for observation. Any trauma at this stage requires monitoring." "Is there any chance of delayed complications?" Preston asked, his voice now carrying the precise, questioning tone he used in his courtroom. "There's always a small risk with any abdominal trauma," she admitted. "But you're young and healthy." The baby appears completely unaffected. As Dr. Chan left to arrange for my room, Preston pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Through the partially open door, I could hear fragments of his conversation. Words like federal prosecutor, assault charges, witness statements. The machinery was already in motion. When he came back, his face was grim but resolved. "I've contacted Keith Chandler at the U.S. Attorney's Office," he said. "He's opening a federal investigation into Brenda's assault." "Federal?" I asked, my head still spinning. "Why not just the local police?" "Because she assaulted the wife of a federal official," he explained calmly. "Which makes it a federal crime under multiple statutes. He's already dispatching agents to the party to get sworn statements from everyone who saw what happened." The efficiency of it was staggering. Just a few hours ago, my biggest worry was an awkward family dinner. Now, FBI agents were interviewing my relatives. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took my hand. "Brenda gets arrested. Probably tomorrow morning. Keith will seek federal charges for assault on a federal official's family member. It carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. 20 years. The number hung in the air between us. 20 years felt like a lifetime. She was cruel, she was violent, but she was still my sister. "Preston," I began, my voice trembling. "Are you doing this because it's the right thing to do legally, or because you're angry?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the same careful deliberation he brought to his judicial decisions. "Both," he said finally. "Yes, I am furious that someone hurt you and threatened our daughter. But that's not why I called Keith. I called him because your sister committed a serious federal crime in front of 50 witnesses. If I, as a federal judge, didn't report this, I would be failing in my duty." His voice softened. "Audrey, what Brenda did wasn't just a family argument that got out of hand. She deliberately attacked a pregnant woman. That's a glimpse into someone capable of extreme violence. We have to stop her before she hurts someone else." As they wheeled me to my overnight room, I knew he was right. I thought about the look on Brenda's face after she'd kicked me. The satisfaction. The pleasure. She hadn't just lost control. She had enjoyed it. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The next day, after a restless night in the hospital, we came home. Our house in Cherry Creek, usually a sanctuary of calm, felt different. It felt like the eye of a storm. Preston helped me get settled on the living room couch with a mountain of pillows, then disappeared into his home office to make more calls. I could hear the low murmur of his voice, discussing legal strategies and federal statutes. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated, bracing myself, before answering. "Mija, how are you feeling?" Her voice was thick with exhaustion and worry. "I'm better, Mom. The baby's fine. We're both going to be okay." "Thank God," she whispered. I was so scared. I didn't sleep at all last night. There was a long pause. "Audrey, your father told Brenda to leave. She and Gary left last night. Gary's staying with his brother. He's very upset." I wondered if he was upset about the violence, or about the consequences that were now barreling down on them like a freight train. "Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I need to ask you something. Has Brenda ever been violent before? Has she ever hit Gary? Or you?" Another pause, this one longer, heavier. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "There have been incidents. Nothing like yesterday. But yes. Sometimes when she gets very angry, she throws things. Pushes people. Last year, she grabbed Gary's arm so hard it left marks. And why didn't anyone tell me? What were we supposed to say?" Her voice was laced with a weary rationalization I knew all too well. "That your sister has a temper? You already knew that. It's not like she was beating anyone, just losing control sometimes. That was the problem. Our family had spent so many years minimizing Brenda's behavior, making excuses for her, that we had lost track of where normal ended and abuse began. Grabbing someone hard enough to leave marks wasn't losing control. It was assault." "Mom, what Brenda did yesterday wasn't just losing control," I said firmly. "It was deliberate." "I know, Mija, I know," she said, her voice cracking. "But maybe if we all sit down and talk, if Brenda apologizes properly, maybe this doesn't have to involve the courts." "It's too late for that, Mom," I said gently. "Brenda committed a federal crime. The FBI is already investigating." "The FBI?" she gasped. "Audrey, she's your sister. Families should handle family problems. Families should protect each other," I replied, a profound sadness settling over me. Brenda chose to attack me instead. After we hung up, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man and a woman in dark suits, holding up badges. FBI. Just as Preston had promised. I called for him, and he emerged from his office, unsurprised. "Mrs. Hayes," the woman said. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Chin, and this is Special Agent Michael Torres. We're investigating the assault that occurred yesterday." Agent Chin was sharp, professional, and all business. For the next hour, I walked them through every detail. The morning texts, the escalating argument, the insults, the moment she struck me. They asked precise questions. "Has your sister ever been physically violent with you before yesterday?" Agent Torres asked. I thought carefully. "Not directly. But she's always been aggressive. Intimidating. When we were teenagers, she used to corner me during arguments, get right in my face and yell until I backed down." "Any witnesses to those incidents?" "Usually just family. We just treated it as normal sibling rivalry." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. As they were preparing to leave, Agent Torres asked one more question, a question that sent a chill down my spine. "Are you aware of any other violent incidents involving your sister? Other victims who might be reluctant to come forward?" The question hung in the air. I thought about Mom's admission about Gary. About the way Gary always seemed to be walking on eggshells around his own wife. But before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Gary. Please call me. It's important. Don't tell anyone." I showed the text to the agents. Agent Chen's eyes narrowed. "Step outside and make the call," she said. "Put it on speaker." My hand was shaking as I dialed. "Gary? It's Audrey." "Audrey, thank God," his voice was a panicked whisper. "Listen, I have to tell you something. This wasn't random. She's been planning, not this, exactly, but something. She's been talking to someone." "Talking to who, Gary?" Preston asked, his voice sharp from beside me. There was a choked sob on the other end of the line. "I don't know his name. But he's been feeding her ideas for months. filling her head with poison about Preston, about you. He paid her, Audrey. He was paying her to get information. This whole thing, it's bigger than you think. Gary's words hung in the air, thick with dread. He paid her. The idea was so monstrous, so bizarre, it hardly seemed real. My own sister, taking money to spy on me? The FBI agents exchanged a look. This had just escalated from a violent domestic dispute to something far more sinister. Gary, we need you to tell us everything you know, Agent Chen said, her voice calm but commanding. Over the next 30 minutes, a sordid, unbelievable story tumbled out. Gary, finally free from Brenda's immediate presence, unloaded months of fear and suspicion. He explained that about 6 months ago, Brenda had been contacted online by a man who initially posed as a potential client for their design business. But soon, the conversations shifted. The man, who Gary only knew by a screen name, started preying on Brenda's existing resentment. He told her that powerful people like Preston often had secrets, that they used their influence to crush smaller people, that Brenda's fears about her family being looked down upon were valid. He started asking for information. Small things at first. Preston's schedule. The names of our friends. Then it became more specific. Financial information she might overhear at family gatherings. Details about my pregnancy, my doctor's appointments. And with each piece of information, a payment would appear in a separate bank account Brenda had opened. Gary had found the statements by accident. When he confronted her, she'd flown into a rage, accusing him of spying on her and threatening him with divorce if he ever mentioned it again. She was obsessed, Gary whispered, his voice cracking. She spent hours on the phone with him. He was like a cult leader, feeding her paranoia. He convinced her that Preston was some kind of threat to our family. After the call ended, the agents worked with a new urgency. Within hours, using the information Gary provided, they had a name, Vincent Thorne. When Preston heard the name, I saw him go pale. I know him, he said, his voice grim. He was an assistant U.S. attorney. A rising star. I was on the judicial review panel that recommended his disbarment 5 years ago. He was caught fabricating evidence to secure convictions. He tried to ruin innocent lives. The motive clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This was never just about Brenda's jealousy. It was about Thorne's revenge. He had found the perfect weapon to strike at the man who had helped end his career, a bitter, resentful, and easily manipulated family member. My mind reeled. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, every piece of personal information I had ever shared with my sister had potentially been sold, packaged, and delivered to my husband's mortal enemy. She wasn't just my sister, she had been a paid informant. A spy in my own family. Later that evening, Keith Chandler, the prosecutor, came to our house. He spread documents across our dining room table, bank records, phone logs, preliminary forensics from Brenda's computer, which the FBI had already seized from her home office. The picture they painted was sickening. The connection goes back almost 6 months, Keith explained. Thorne was grooming her. He fed her ego, validated her grievances, and then slowly turned her into an asset. The payments started small, a few $100s here and there. But in the last month, as they started planning for a public confrontation, the payments increased significantly. She was stalking us, I said, the realization hitting me like another physical blow. Essentially, yes, Keith confirmed. And all of it was being directed by Thorne, who was building a comprehensive profile of your vulnerabilities. Preston's face was like stone. Keith, he said, if Thorne has been orchestrating this for months, Brenda's assault might not have been the endgame. It might have been just the opening move. Agreed, Keith said grimly. Which is why we're treating this as an ongoing threat to judicial security. Thorne isn't just a disgruntled lawyer, he's a criminal mastermind. By arresting Brenda, we've cut off his direct line to you, but we now have to assume he has other plans. The conversation shifted to legal strategy. With the conspiracy angle, the case against Brenda was now ironclad. It showed premeditation. Malice. It wasn't a crime of passion, it was a contracted hit, emotionally if not literally. With conspiracy charges added to the assault, Keith said, she's looking at a minimum of 15 years. Possibly life, if we can prove the conspiracy endangered federal operations. Life in prison. For my sister. The volatile, cruel, foolish girl who had let her jealousy be twisted into a weapon by a monster. A part of me, a small, sad part, almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, as Preston and I lay in bed, the weight of it all pressed down on me. Do you think she knew? I asked into the darkness. Do you think Brenda understood what Thorne was really doing? Preston was quiet for a long time. I think, he said finally, that Brenda knew exactly what she was doing. She just convinced herself it was justified. Choosing to hurt you, Audrey, required her to decide that her grievances were more important than your safety and our daughter's life. Nobody makes that choice by accident. They make it because, on some level, they want to. 8 months felt like a lifetime. In that time, my world had been completely reshaped. Our daughter, Hazel, was born 2 weeks early, a tiny, perfect thing who seemed to carry a fierce will to live. Holding her in my arms, I knew I would do anything to protect her. And that meant seeing this through to the end. The federal courthouse was a place I knew well from my days as a reporter, but walking into it now, as the victim in my own sister's trial, felt surreal. Media crews were camped out on the steps, drawn by the salacious details of the case, a federal judge's family torn apart by jealousy, betrayal, and a sinister conspiracy. Preston held my hand tightly as we made our way through the throng of reporters. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. We met with Keith Chandler in a small conference room. Her new lawyer filed a last-minute motion to have the conspiracy charges dismissed, Keith told us, shuffling through a thick binder. He's trying to argue that Brenda was manipulated by Thorne, a victim herself. Any chance the judge will grant it? Preston asked. Keith shook his head. Doubtful. We have the bank records. We have transcripts of their calls. We have the detailed reports Brenda sent him about your family. It's impossible to argue she was an unwilling participant. When we finally entered the courtroom, I saw my family sitting in the gallery. My parents looked like they'd aged 10 years. My mom offered me a weak, heartbroken smile. The revelations about Brenda's conspiracy with Thorne had shattered her. She finally understood that this wasn't just a temper tantrum, it was a calculated act of evil. Then I saw Brenda, seated at the defendant's table. 8 months in federal custody had changed her. She was thinner, her hair had lost its shine, and she was dressed in a drab prison jumpsuit. But when her eyes found mine, the look in them was the same. Pure, unadulterated hatred. There was no remorse there. No regret. Just the same venom that had fueled her for years. The trial began. Keith Chandler stood to deliver his opening statement, his voice calm but forceful. He painted a picture not of a family dispute, but of an attack on the rule of law. Over the course of this trial, he told the jury, you will hear evidence that Brenda Rodriguez didn't simply lose her temper at a family gathering. She executed a months-long plan, developed in cooperation with a disgraced criminal, to assault her pregnant sister in the most public and damaging way possible. She chose money over family. She chose violence over decency. And she chose to target a pregnant woman because she knew it would cause maximum pain. The first witness he called was Gary. Brenda's now ex-husband walked to the stand with a heavy reluctance. He had filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. Mr. Peterson, Keith began, can you describe your former wife's behavior in the months leading up to the assault? Gary's voice was barely a whisper as he described Brenda's growing obsession, her late-night phone calls, her paranoia. She became convinced, Gary testified, that Judge Hayes was using his position to investigate our family. She thought every routine government interaction was part of some conspiracy against her. When Audrey got pregnant, she saw it as the ultimate betrayal. Did you ever hear Brenda and Vincent Thorne discuss plans to harm Mrs. Hayes? Keith asked. Brenda's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. Overruled, the judge said calmly. The witness will answer the question. Gary looked directly at Brenda for the first time, his expression a mixture of fear and resolve. Yes, he said, his voice gaining strength. About 2 months before the party, I overheard Brenda on the phone. They were talking about creating a public incident that would force Judge Hayes to recuse himself from cases. They specifically discussed targeting Audrey because her pregnancy made her vulnerable, and because attacking a pregnant woman would generate the most outrage. A gasp went through the courtroom. Brenda flushed a deep, ugly red and began whispering furiously to her attorney. The damage was done. The very first witness had established premeditation. This wasn't a sisterly spat. This was a conspiracy. The prosecution continued to build its case, brick by damning brick. Agent Chin from the FBI took the stand next, walking the jury through the mountain of digital evidence they had recovered from Brenda's computer and phone. On the large screen set up in the courtroom, we all saw it. The text messages between Brenda and Thorne discussing the judge problem. The emails outlining strategies for neutralizing federal interference. And the surveillance photos. My breath caught in my throat. There were hundreds of them. Photos of Preston and me leaving for work. Going to the grocery store. Walking into Dr. Chang's office for my checkups. It was chilling. She had been watching us for months, documenting our lives, our routines, and feeding it all to a man who wanted to destroy us. Did Ms. Rodriguez share this surveillance information with Vincent Thorne? Keith asked Agent Chin. Yes, the agent replied crisply. We have records of regular reports sent to Mr. Thorne, including photographs and detailed schedules. Ms. Rodriguez was essentially functioning as a paid informant, providing intelligence about a federal judge and his family to a man with a known vendetta against the federal judiciary. Brenda's lawyer tried his best on cross-examination, attempting to paint her as a pawn, a woman manipulated by a sophisticated con man. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The bank record showed she wasn't just a pawn, she was a paid employee. But the prosecution's star witness, the moment everyone was waiting for, was Vincent Thorne himself. 3 months into his own federal detention, the disgraced former prosecutor had agreed to cooperate with the government in exchange for a reduced sentence. He walked into the courtroom in shackles, his once impressive presence diminished by his time behind bars. He looked like what he was, a bitter, broken man. His testimony was devastating. In a flat, matter-of-fact tone, he laid out his entire plan. He described how he identified Brenda as a person with existing resentment and a malleable moral compass. Family dynamics made her the perfect inside source, Thorne testified, without a hint of emotion. Her willingness to accept payment for information told me she could be convinced to take more direct action. And did you specifically instruct Ms. Rodriguez to assault her pregnant sister? Keith asked, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. Thorne gave a slight, chilling smile. Not in those exact words, he said. I made it clear that a public incident involving the judge's pregnant wife would create maximum damage to his reputation. Brenda understood what I was asking for. And how did you communicate this understanding? Then came the final, soul-crushing blow. The revelation that twisted the knife in my heart one last time. Thorne looked over at the jury. I didn't have to, he said calmly. Brenda suggested targeting her sister's pregnancy herself. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged her gavel for order. I just stared at my sister, my mind refusing to process what I had just heard. It wasn't Thorne's idea. It was hers. She said, Thorne continued, his voice void of all emotion, that attacking a pregnant woman would generate the kind of public outrage that would destroy the judge's credibility permanently. She was quite proud of the idea. I simply encouraged this line of thinking and provided an additional payment to incentivize the action. It was all there. The complete and utter betrayal. She wasn't manipulated into violence. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect of my deepest pain. She had looked at my unborn child, her own niece, and had seen not family, but a target. A tool to be used for her own petty revenge. In that moment, any last shred of sympathy I might have had for her turned to dust. When it was my turn to testify, a strange calm settled over me. I walked to the witness stand, my head held high. Hazel was safe with Preston's mother in the courthouse child care facility, and I was free to focus, to face my sister one last time and speak my truth. Keith's questions were straightforward. He asked me to describe what happened at the party. I told them about the pain, about the terror of thinking I had lost my daughter. I talked about the emotional trauma of being attacked by my own sister at what should have been a happy family celebration. Mrs. Hayes, Keith asked gently, prior to your mother's birthday party, were you aware that your sister was being paid to spy on your family? No, I said, my voice clear and steady. I had no idea. I thought her anger came from a place of jealousy. I never imagined it was a professional transaction. And how has this experience affected your relationship with your extended family? I looked toward the gallery, at my parents, their faces etched with grief. It's destroyed it, I said honestly. It's destroyed relationships that took a lifetime to build. What was supposed to be the happiest time in my life, expecting my first child, became a nightmare of surveillance, betrayal, and violence. On cross-examination, Brenda's lawyer was gentle. He tried to suggest that Brenda had always been troubled, that mental health issues might have made her more susceptible to Thorne's manipulation. But I refused to give him an inch. I would not make excuses for her. Not anymore. Mrs. Hayes, he said, would you agree that your sister has struggled with anger management issues throughout her life? My sister has always been volatile, I replied, looking directly at the jury. But volatility is not the same as calculated cruelty. Taking money to spy on your family and then planning an attack on your pregnant sister isn't an anger management issue. It's a deliberate choice. The final witness was Dr. Chang. In her calm, professional voice, she described the medical risks Brenda's assault had posed to both me and Hazel. She spoke of placental abruption, premature labor, and fetal death. She reminded everyone in that room how close my sister had come to committing an even more horrific crime. During closing arguments, Keith Morrison painted Brenda as someone who had betrayed every bond of family and decency for money and spite. He reminded the jury that this wasn't a moment of poor judgment, but the culmination of a months-long conspiracy. The evidence, he concluded, demands a conviction on all counts. Brenda's lawyer did his best, but it was a hopeless task. The evidence was simply too vast, too clear. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, a grim expression on his face. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Preston reached over and took my hand. On the charge of assault on an immediate family member of a federal official, the foreman said, his voice echoing in the silent room, we the jury find the defendant, Brenda Rodriguez, guilty. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled me washed over. On the charge of conspiracy to threaten a federal official, he continued, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of interstate threatening communications, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty. On all counts. Brenda showed no emotion. She just sat there, her face a blank mask, as her life crumbled around her. As the bailiffs came to lead her away, her eyes finally met mine one last time. They were empty. The fire was gone. There was nothing left but ash. If you're still listening, could you please do me a favor and like this video, and comment the number 1 down below? That way, I'll know you gave me a like, and I'll know you've been with me on this whole journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment the number 1, and then listen as I tell you the rest of my story. It's amazing how much can change in 2 years. The storm passes, the floodwaters recede, and you're left to survey the damage and decide what to rebuild. For us, we decided to build something beautiful. 2 years after Brenda was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison, the morning sun was once again streaming through my windows. But this time, it was a new house, nestled in the foothills outside Denver, a place that felt a million miles away from the painful memories of the city. Our daughter Hazel, now a rambunctious 2.5-year-old with Preston's dark eyes and my stubborn streak, was chasing our golden retriever through the backyard. And I stood at the kitchen window, watching them, one hand resting on my new, growing belly. Our second daughter, Paige, was due in 3 months. This pregnancy was everything the first one wasn't: peaceful, celebrated, and surrounded by love instead of surveillance and threats. On the kitchen table, spread among Hazel's crayon drawings, were the architectural plans for the Williams Center for Family Justice. After the trial, Preston and I knew we couldn't just go back to the way things were. We had been given a painful, first-hand look at a unique kind of vulnerability, how family ties could be weaponized against public officials. We decided to channel our experience into something constructive. Our center would provide legal services, counseling, and safe housing for families dealing with these complex, internal threats. We wanted to turn our trauma into a shield for others. Preston came in from the deck, a plate of pancakes in his hand and Hazel perched on his hip. "The contractor says the main building will be finished by Christmas," he said, smiling. "Perfect timing for the grand opening." Watching him with our daughter, I was filled with a profound sense of gratitude. This was what we had fought for. This normal, beautiful, pancake-filled morning. This was the life Brenda and Vincent Thorne had tried so hard to destroy. And they had failed. They had failed spectacularly. Our family dynamic had shifted, too. My parents had both entered therapy to process their role in enabling Brenda's behavior for so long. Our conversations now had a depth and honesty that had been missing for years. They were devoted grandparents, pouring all the love they couldn't give to their lost daughter into Hazel. The wounds were still there, of course. A daughter in federal prison is a scar that never truly fades. But we were healing. Together. The work on the center became our focus. We partnered with the FBI to create training programs for law enforcement. We worked with federal prosecutors to develop new protocols. We wanted to ensure that no other family would have to navigate the nightmare we endured alone. What started as a personal tragedy had become our life's mission. One afternoon, about a month before Paige was born, I got a call from Keith Chandler. He had become a close friend and now served on the advisory board for our Justice Center. "Audrey, I have some news about Brenda," he said, his voice gentle. Her final appeal was denied by the 10th Circuit. The conviction and sentence are final. It's officially over. I felt a familiar, complicated mix of relief and sadness. Her legal team had exhausted every avenue, but the evidence had simply been too overwhelming. "How is she?" I asked, though a part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. "According to her counselor," Keith said, "she's different. She's finally accepting responsibility. Participating in anger management programs, working in the prison library. It's possible she's genuinely changing." Change. The word felt strange when applied to my sister. For my entire life, she had been a fixed point of resentment and volatility. The idea that the stark, unyielding consequences of federal prison might have accomplished what decades of family intervention couldn't seemed almost impossible. "She has asked, through her attorney, if she could write to you," Keith added. "No demands, no expectations. Just to acknowledge what she did." I thought about it for a long time. I looked at the plans for the center on my table, at my daughter playing on the floor. My children would grow up knowing they had an aunt in prison. But they would also grow up in a world where their parents had turned that darkness into a beacon of hope for others. "I'm not ready for that yet," I told Keith honestly. "Maybe someday. But not yet." And then, about a year later, after Paige was born and the center had its grand opening, a letter arrived. It wasn't forwarded by her attorney. It was addressed in her familiar, looping handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was short. There were no excuses, no self-pity. It just said, "Audrey, I know there is nothing I can say that can undo the damage I caused. I live with that every day. I don't write this to ask for your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted to say that I am sorry. I was consumed by a poison that I allowed to grow inside me, and I let it destroy everything. I hope, someday, that my nieces will know that their father is a good man who married a strong woman. And I hope they know that they come from people who know how to turn darkness into light. Brenda." And that was it. It was the first thing she had ever written that sounded like wisdom rather than rage. Maybe prison had changed her. Or maybe she'd finally grown tired of carrying so much anger. Either way, as I folded the letter, I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. A quiet, peaceful sense that the story was well and truly over. My sister had found her consequences, and I had found my purpose. The Williams Center for Family Justice will serve families for decades to come. And every person who finds safety within its walls will be a testament to a simple truth, that the very violence intended to destroy a family can become the foundation for something that heals hundreds more. My sister tried to ruin my life. Instead, she gave me a mission. And for that, in the strangest of ways, I suppose I can finally be at peace. And so, this story leaves us with a profound reminder of the strength it takes to rise above betrayal, pain, and unimaginable loss. It teaches us that even in the darkest moments, we have the power to choose how we respond, whether to let bitterness consume us or to transform our pain into purpose. Life may test us in ways we never expect, but it is in those moments of adversity that our true character is revealed. Audrey and Preston's journey shows us the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary ability to turn personal tragedy into a force for good. At its core, this story is a testament to the power of forgiveness, not necessarily for the one who caused harm, but for ourselves, so we can heal and move forward. It's a call to confront the difficult truths in our lives, to set boundaries where they are needed, and to protect what matters most. It reminds us that even when trust is shattered, we can rebuild, not always with the same people, but with the lessons they leave behind. What do you take away from this journey of resilience and redemption? Share your thoughts below or simply comment good if this story inspired you to reflect on the strength within yourself. Let's keep this conversation going and learn from one another.